Hi everybody, my name is Matilda Brown. I'm a proud Dharawal woman. I've been working in community engagement for the last 5 years, and I just want to say thank you for joining us here to talk about the Voice referendum. I'd just like to acknowledge that we are here on Bidjigal country, and I just want to introduce our guest speakers today. So we have Marcia Ella-Duncan, who I know you have over 35 years experience in Indigenous affairs.
Yes.
And been working that area for a long time, which is amazing. And I know you're both respected community members in La Perouse. And Chris, I know you're the CEO of La Perouse Local Aboriginal Land Council, and also one of the directors of Inner Sydney Empowered Communities. So we're very lucky to have them both here. I just wanted to let you all know that we're going to do a little presentation. Chris will have a chat to you, and we're going to do some questions at the end, which I think you can access through the Q&A function on Zoom, and then also in the comments in Facebook. I'd just like to pass over to Mayor Philippa Veach as well. I think she was going to say a few words.
Sorry, just unmuting myself. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. And it's a privilege to be here and to be participating in this fantastic event. Council, of course, Council is very strongly in support of the yes vote on Saturday. So don't forget to cast your vote. And of course, I'd like to acknowledge the ownership of the land by First Nations people. Here in Randwick, we are proud to be on the land of the Bidjigal and Gadigal people. And I would like to pay my very deepest respects to elders past and present, the emerging leaders coming through, and all Aboriginal people in attendance today. We're in a spectacular setting here, and Randwick. I'm very, this is a fantastic event, and the Voice is such an important part of our community. So thank you very much. I'm sorry, I've been rushing from another event, and it's been, thank you very much. And I hope you all get a chance to answer any questions and just engage in this great opportunity to learn more about the Voice and what it means. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Philippa. I'd just like to hand over to Chris now to present.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us online. Today I just wanted to run through a presentation on what the referendum on Saturday is all about, and in particular from a local and regional point of view, working with government.
I further declare that the Motion North South Wales will further conditions. All the Black House is representation in federal parliament. There is also 26 parliament, and an end to growth for the law. 150 years ago, the Aboriginals owned Australia, and again, he demands more than elected champion.
Joe Anderson, Aboriginal man on the Georges River, on the western shores of Botany Bay, 90 years ago, pleaded with his people to come together and send a petition to the then King for representation in federal parliament, so true representation from our people, and also the right to live. On Saturday, you'll see on the presentation, there is a simple paragraph that is being proposed. There is a simple question, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a couple of minutes. Constitutional recognition for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people is not new. In 1988, Burringa Statement was provided to the then Prime Minister Bob Hawke by Yolngu people around constitutional recognition. And over that time, and in particular since 2007, every Prime Minister that Australia has had has committed to recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the Constitution. And it wasn't until recently that the current Prime Minister has really committed that and has taken that question to the people. There has, what constitutional recognition looks like, there has been many joint select committees and other parliamentary committees to determine what recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people would look like in the Constitution. There has, in 2017, 250 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, following numerous forums across the country, gathered at Uluru to develop and put forward what became the Uluru Statement from the Heart. 97% of the participants at the meeting agreed to the Uluru Statement for the Heart and put that to the Australian people. And the three main parts are voice, treaty, and truth. In 2020, the then Prime Minister Scott Morrison commissioned a report. He committed to the voice part of the Uluru Statement from the Heart and commissioned a detailed report on what a co-designed, what a voice would look like. And the government went out and engaged with Aboriginal leaders, Aboriginal communities, organisation, and the non-Aboriginal community on what a voice would look like if the Australian government was to establish a voice for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Since 1973, there is a graph that will be on your screen. In 1973, since 1973, so following the 1967 referendum, which we'll talk about, the federal government has introduced a number of representative bodies, starting from the National Aboriginal Consultative Committee in 1973. It was by the Gough Whitlam government. When the next government, the Liberal coalition government, came into power, they scrapped that one and created the National Aboriginal Conference. Pretty much did the same thing, they just removed one word, so it wasn't a Labor initiative. And over time, as we can see, there has been numerous bodies or representative bodies or advisory bodies that have come and go depending on the government of the day. So in 1901, the Australian people decided to federate the existing English colonies on the continent of Australia and formed the Federation. And in 1901, the Constitution was established to create an Australian Parliament, an Australian government. However, I'm going to go back a slide. However, and the words there, and I'll just read the words. The Constitution allowed the Australian Parliament the power to make special laws for any people of any race other than the Aboriginal race in any state. So the Constitution was established, excluded Aboriginal people, and the Australian Parliament and the people at the time with the Federation said the states can continue to make laws for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. In 1967, the referendum clearly asked the Australian people to remove the words other than the Aboriginal race in any state, to ensure that the Australian Parliament can make laws on behalf of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in this country. And that allowed Aboriginal people to be included in the census and the Australian government to start delivering services to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and communities. Hence, in 1973 was the establishment of the National Aboriginal Consultative Committee. So on Saturday, the Australian people are being asked to include and recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the Constitution. The first part is recognition. Do the Australian people want to recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the Constitution? The founding, or the highest document in this country, as we know, is the Constitution. And do we acknowledge the 65,000 plus years of occupation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here in Australia? The first part is there shall be a body called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice. It allows a guarantee that there will be a voice, always will be a voice for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and the government has to make sure that a voice, or Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, Indigenous people, can be heard, and the government will listen. The voice will, if successful on Saturday, a voice may make representation to the Australian Parliament and the executive government. And in my experience, for the last 20 plus years in La Perouse, we work with the government of the day. It's very difficult for us to work with the opposition. Sometimes the opposition receives information, they then politicise it and weaponise that information against the government. It's the opposition's job to do, is oppose everything that the government does. And that makes that very awkward for us, because then the government doesn't really want to work with us. But what I like about this proposal, that it allows the Parliament, so the Australian Parliament, whether it's the party in government, the opposition, independents, or minor parties, ensures that they have access to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and hear their voice firsthand, and not through the government of the day. And the third part, and this is an important one leading up to Saturday, the voice can only make representations on matters that affect Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So it's very narrow, and it's only for matters like health, education, and others, things that are really important for all Australians. It's only for matters that relate to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We've been able to break those four parts down into recognition, like we talked about, a guarantee that they shall be a voice. The third part is the purpose. It talks about what the voice will do, and the detail. The detail is left up to Parliament. So the detail will be, it's up to Parliament to determine through, so the Parliament will develop legislation. The members of the Australian Parliament who we vote in, the Australian people vote in, will be involved in what a voice looks like. And through the parliamentary processes, there will be a number of different committees and hearings, so the Australian people can also have a say on what a voice looks like. So the detail is with the Australian Parliament and the Australian people. The voice will provide advice. It's quite clear that it's an advisory body, and that's all it will do, is provide solid advice to the government. It would be accountable and transparent, and it will work along existing structures, existing Aboriginal corporations, existing land councils, and other organisations, Aboriginal community controlled organisations and people. What it won't do service delivery. That's the job for a government agency called the National Indigenous Australians Agency, and it also won't have a veto power. The proposed structure, there's some principles on how the proposed structure would look, and there's a few points there. I would like to point out that local and regional voices currently exist around the country. State and territory governments have policies. So in New South Wales, under the previous Liberal national government. In 2012, they developed an ochre policy that allowed communities to be called local decision making. They allowed communities to have an interface with government and share information and advise government. So it happens at a local level, but that's a policy. Around the country, there's other mechanisms, including empowered communities, which is highlighted in yellow on the map. And empowered communities is an initiative where communities and regions wanted to work better with government and have government work better with communities to have better outcomes. And that's been existing and operating since 2015. However, that is a policy of the current government of the day. Local and regional voices may look like, so these are just examples. And if you look at the report commissioned by the then Prime Minister Scott Morrison, there's a few details in there. But it's the local and regional voices may be and should be how Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, communities, gather themselves and make decisions. Different communities across Australia, communities are different. It's not all the same. We're not homogenous. The way that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities in urban areas gather and make decisions is totally different to remote and rural. And potentially what a voice would do would be flexible, so it's place-based. So the government listens and works with communities around decision-making, what happens in their community and how the Aboriginal people, how communities currently operate. Again, it's flexible. So I went to that around the local and regional. It's flexible. It's not all a policy written out of Canberra, and every community has to restructure themselves on how they make decisions or how they gather themselves to deliberate and make decisions. It's an interface. So what a voice is, it's an advisory body, it's an interface with government to allow communities to coordinate themselves and go to government with a plan on matters relating to them, to our people. And we'll have federal, state and territory governments at that table. And at the moment, a lot of Aboriginal communities separately go to different federal government agencies, state government agencies and their local government differently and say the same thing. It would be really good if all three levels of government worked with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities across Australia. Why are we doing this? Since 2007, the federal government created Close the Gap targets, where they wanted to close the gap on indicators between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and the rest of Australia. And the amount of resources that have gone into Close the Gap, as we can see on the screen, it's not working. And we believe by government listening to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have the solutions to matters that affect their lives, and government enabling those solutions to be put in practice, we believe that the gap will close a lot faster than what it currently is. And what that will ensure that is the investment into Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities by the government, our taxpayer money, is better spent, and in the long term, all Australians will get a saving because the investment into those communities are actually working and not wasted as they are today. Not by Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander communities, it's wasted because of the way that government does things with our people. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chris. I think we're going to go to some questions now that are going to be sent through from Zoom and Facebook. So if we don't have any yet, maybe get some coming in. Maybe we can have a little chat before then. But I'll sit down with Marcia and Chris. So, Marcia, do you want to have a little chat about sort of your background working in Indigenous affairs and and it'd kind of be good to hear about how you think the voice will positively affect us and our communities.
Yeah, I first started working in Aboriginal affairs as a young woman. I was in my early 20s. I may have been 20 actually. I was in Canberra for sport and, you know, needed a job. So I started working in Aboriginal affairs when Charlie Perkins was the secretary, which was quite an era. So since then, I've worked, you know, in Aboriginal affairs across a broad range of sectors, land rights, community development, child protection, criminal justice, land management and the environment. So I think, you know, I have a really broad perspective around some of the challenges that we continue to face over that long period of time, and also some of the tremendous strengths and, you know, the resilience and the resources in communities. I've also experienced firsthand, along with Chris and like every other Aboriginal person involved in Aboriginal affairs, is the incredible frustration of, you know, continuously, it's almost cyclically working on the same issue year after year after year. If we use housing as an example, which is, you know, one of the areas of chronic need. I think it's one of the areas that are in red on the map. You know, for at least 50 years, the people at Perouse have really been struggling to improve the quality of housing, and there's been investment over those years, but it's never been investment where our community needs it, when our community needs it, how our community needs it. The way we deliver the funding that we do get for housing is often constrained by, you know, government processes. A good example is, you know, some housing money that we had allocated by federal government, which started out at, what was that housing bucket?
The National Aboriginal Health Strategy.
Yeah, it was several $1 million.
Started off with $7 million.
$7 million, and after about 10 years of negotiating on and off with government, by the time it was delivered to Perouse, it was just over $1.2 million, of which probably, you know, 10% of that went to project management, etc., which was appointed by the government, not us. So that's a good example of what it's like in Aboriginal affairs. And
if I can add to that, on that point, and one of the real things that ignited us to do things differently, the then Indigenous agency was called the Family and Community Services Indigenous Affairs. So the Indigenous agency sat within families and community service. FACSIA was the acronym. And FACSIA, through their project officers, said to the people at Perouse on the mission, they called a meeting and listed all the houses that were getting replaced. This is in 2007. All these houses are getting replaced and these are getting refurbished. Here are your move out dates, so start preparing. Mal Bruff, under the Liberal National Government, became Minister for Indigenous Affairs overnight. And the day before Mobstad had to move out, the Land Council got a call by FACSIA. We had to go into their office in the city. And the public servants in FACSIA kept saying to us, the program's changed. The minister's policy is refurbishment, not replacement. You can no longer do it. And we said, well, who's going to deliver that message to our people? Because they're already boxed up and moving out of their homes. They said, we're not. So we had to go back and deliver a negative message that wasn't our fault, but the community gets blamed for it. And that was one of the things that ignited my passion, because what we had a policy by a minister or an agency out of Canberra that affected the lives of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And like Marcia said, the money that was allocated just dwindled over the years, just dwindled away till we had nothing left. But it's not our fault. It wasn't our fault, but we got the blame for it.
And that's so, you know, that is fairly typical of the churn in Aboriginal affairs. And it didn't matter what sector I worked in, I witnessed the same churn. Criminal justice, you know, it doesn't matter what we said to government, whether it's a state government or a federal government, we continue to see our numbers increasing. You know, there are so many areas, for example, where we experience that. And that's what keeps Aboriginal people working with and for Aboriginal people. But what makes a difference, I think, and this is where I think LARPA is such a good example, is that when we invest in a relationship with government, and I don't know if we've actually put a cost on that investment, but it's at least 15 years of investment of our time and resources. And when government, you know, is open to working with Aboriginal people in different ways, we're able to achieve some remarkable outcomes. And, you know, we've still got a long way to go at Perouse. But I think the Gamay Rangers, which is, you know, doing some incredible work around restoring and rehabilitating our precious seagrass in Botany Bay, which supports so many of our iconic species. And, you know, we're working with ancient science and new science and multiple agencies and corporates. And, you know, it's not going to fix everything, but it delivers employment. It helps us meet our cultural responsibilities, and the relationship is solid, but it is always dependent on the policy or the attitude of Canberra. And it continues to consume our resources to develop that. So for me, a voice is terribly important, because that's security in the relationship for us.
You can see with each change of government how, you know, the different groups are abolished and then a new one set up, and it makes it so difficult for communities on a local level to do any sort of future planning. And I've heard you talk about that, Chris, with, I know, maybe you want to talk a bit about empowered communities and the work that you guys do, but how that affects your future planning, because you're basically dictated by whoever is in power at the time, and you know, it's incredibly difficult.
I'll just add to the question.
You're right.
Because it's not just the change of party or the change of government, is it? And the change of attitude, but it's the change in program and services that ensue that has, you know, flow-on effect to our everyday lives.
Empowered Communities was a joint initiative across 10 for 8 regions, now 10 regions across Australia. And it was born out of frustration on the duplication of services funded by the federal government. The services that were funded weren't known, weren't valued. Therefore, there was no return and no purpose. So there was a massive amount of waste in the Aboriginal development sector. And what we wanted to do was try and reset the relationship with government to do it in partnership. And there's great examples across Australia, but for inner Sydney and in La Perouse, we built the relationship, not just with ministers, we built the relationship with senior public servants. But what's frustrating and tiring is that when they change, we've got to reset the relationship with the new person and do it all over again. And that takes a lot of time, effort and resources. However, with empowered communities, in La Perouse, what we've been able to see is we've got the government to think differently, structural change on how they work with Aboriginal communities, and place-based design is really important. So there's a lot of principles in the Close the Gap now around place-based design. We wanted to be Aboriginal community-led and government facilitate. And we can see that happen in La Perouse with the Gamay Rangers, our social and emotional wellbeing program called Strengthening Our Mob, La Perouse Youth Haven. There's a number of different programs and services we provide, not just Aboriginal community, but the whole community in our area, so the non-Aboriginal community as well, that was specifically designed for our community. And it's effective and it's working because of that. In the past, there was one program or one policy Australia-wide, and every little Aboriginal community had to fit within that policy. And what we found was we were changing the way we did business based on the policy of Canberra or a program of Canberra, how they wanted the program to be rolled out in Aboriginal communities. So I think governments working with Aboriginal communities, we get far better outcomes.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's interesting. Obviously, I've had conversations with a lot of people about the voice, and I've you know, I've heard some people who are against it say, well, there is representation in Parliament of Indigenous people, and it's interesting because there's only 1.5% of federal parliamentarians that are Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, and those people don't represent, you know, communities on a grassroots level. They represent all their constituents, which I think, you know, Marcia, you could probably speak to that a bit better than I can, but
yeah, I think you do quite well, but it's a really important point. You know, representation in Parliament, not to Parliament, but representation in Parliament is something that Aboriginal people have aspired to, and we heard, you know, a clip from 38 where that was being called for. And you know, it's only 1.5, but we do have Aboriginal people who are representatives in Parliament, and we're incredibly proud of them. But they are elected by their constituents, which are, you know, communities anywhere all over Australia that are made up of people that come from all different parts of the world, including First Australians. So they are representatives, but they're not elected by Aboriginal people, with all due respect. What we are looking for is a structure that enables our local communities to be able to forward up their needs and priorities in a structured way, knowing that it will make its way to Parliament and to government. And that's quite a different form of representation. That's a community-led representation. And, you know, this is providing advice to Parliament and to government. So they're quite separate. But, you know, I have to say, of course, we want to see increased representation of First Nations people in Parliament. I'd also like to see increased representation of people with disabilities in Parliament. I'd also like to see increased representation of people from non-English speaking backgrounds in Parliament. Our Parliament should reflect what Australia looks like, and that's 3% of Aboriginal representation. But yeah, I think community representation is really quite different and unique. It's not Western, it's ours, and Chris alluded to that in terms of flexibility.
And if I can add to that, the Parliament, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the Australian Parliament, they're elected by their political party. So we've got people, so their electorate, like Marcia said, in the House of Representatives, but the majority of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are in the Senate. And they're placed there already by their political party. And what we see in history, whether they're Aboriginal or non-Aboriginal, they're bound by their political party's policy, no matter their personal view. So although we do have Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Parliament, they are bounded by their, whether it's Labor, Liberal, National, the Greens, or a minor party, they are bounded by their party position.
I think we have some questions coming through, so I'm going to check those ones. So what do we have here? So, okay, this is the first question. What is the definition of Indigenous for the purpose of this proposed change?
So there is both federal law and state and territory laws around Australia, but there's state laws in New South Wales that what defines an Aboriginal person, an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person. There's a 3-part criteria that they have to belong or a descendant of an Aboriginal person, so belong to the Aboriginal race of Australia. They have to identify as an Aboriginal person, and they have to be accepted by their community, the community, as an Aboriginal person. Now, in New South Wales, that definition solely speaks to Aboriginal people only, but obviously there's Torres Strait Islander people in New South Wales and do contribute a lot to our communities, and a part of the voice proposal would ensure, like we see in the co-design report, will ensure that Torres Strait Islander people on the mainland get a voice as well.
Another question. So what would you say to those who are worried that the voice is the start of a division in the communities between Aboriginal people and Australians?
If I can add on our Marcia's the division already exists. It existed with at the creation of the Constitution by excluding Aboriginal people. And 90% of Australians in 67 voted for yes, to have that part repealed, but it didn't go far enough. So we voted yes, and we'll count it in the census, and the federal parliament can make laws. But let's face it, they've made some very bad laws, policies, and programs for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I think where there is no division is when the gap is closed.
Yeah.
And the gap has only been created since colonisation in this country, since European people arrived. And I think the only time that we are not divided as a country is when the gap closes.
Okay. I think that's a really good point, Chris.
Yeah.
I hope you don't mind if I quote that.
No,
in the
you're
future.
right.
But I think I have quite an emotional response to that kind of question, because you know, if we had some federal politicians here from, you know, Matt Thistlewaite, our local member, for example, would say that, you know, the inspiration for the referendum actually came from the Uluru Statement from the Heart, which does call, as Chris pointed out, for truth, treaty, and voice. But the final line in the Uluru Statement from the Heart is actually an invitation for all Australians to walk together on our journey towards a better Australia for all Australians. And for the life of me, I can't say how that's divisive.
Yeah.
I think that's a genuine, heartfelt, earnest invitation. We've been on this journey. My personal journey is 60 years old, but this country's journey is, you know, well over 200 years old. And I think we're mature enough now to be able to step forward. But I think, you know, the no, because, you know, it divides, I think will certainly divide. I think that will certainly divide. It's like, what do they call that? You know, self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
And, you know, we were talking a little bit earlier outside about, you know, what happens if the referendum is unsuccessful.
Yeah.
And my greatest fear is the relationship impact.
And the way it'll damage reconciliation.
And whether that will set this country back.
Yeah.
And, you know, whether it will set our community back. So I think, you know, the no argument about dividing the country is based purely on fear.
And I think
purely on fear.
And I think that the no argument is accepting that it's okay. What we've done for the last 50 years is okay.
Yeah.
And we're okay to continue to do it. And I think Australians are smart enough and mature enough to know it's not good enough. And in the long run, all Australians will benefit from a better Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander policy and programs in Australia, and we'll do things better.
You know, there's you know, talk about a no vote, and, you know, that means the status quo. Well, if Australia is satisfied to, you know, expend $33 billion annually, nationally, in Aboriginal affairs for worsening outcomes, 15% of that funding, mind you, is estimated to reach Aboriginal communities. If Australia is comfortable with that, well, you know, a no vote will deliver that for another 50 years. A yes vote gives us the opportunity to do things differently. A yes vote actually opens the door for, you know, greater relationship, better collaboration, targeted outcomes, proper investment, better bang for the dollar for all Australia.
And if I can point out, I know you're asking the questions,
No.
but if I can, it's an advisory body. The Parliament has multiple advisory bodies. The difference, the difference with this one is we want it protected in the Constitution, because as we've seen for the last 50 years, we're a political football where one party abolishes something that's working well just because the other side introduced it and they don't want to be a part of it. And that's what we're asking the Australian people is to be able that we can protect a voice into the future. So it's not faceless men of a political party who make that decision. It's actually the people. But also the Australian people can hold the government account. So to close the gap, it's Aboriginal people trying to hold them account. It's now if a voice is successful, the Australian people understand what it is. They'll be able to contribute to what a voice looks like in their area and across Australia, and it makes sure that non-Aboriginal people, 97% of the population, holds the government account on how they are performing with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people.
Yeah, which Marcia, I found it really interesting. You said that a lot of the no vote comes from a place of fear, and I think, and this has come up in conversations that I've had, that fear comes from not. I've heard people say, "Oh, there's not enough information." You know, if the yes vote gets through, how will the body work? And I think, Chris, I've heard you talk about that, but it doesn't mean that on Sunday we're going to have a clear path on exactly how this is going to work. It's going to take a number of years to develop.
I think what non-Aboriginal Australia needs to better understand, I think, is that a yes vote changes nothing for Australians. For every other, for every non-Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander person in this country, a yes vote changes nothing. They have nothing to lose.
Yeah,
we do. We're 3% of the population. We have no say. Yeah. We need Australia to walk with us to make a change in our lives, not yours. Sorry.
No,
in our lives. We're not asking to be able to change the way government works, to change things for everyday Australians.
Yeah.
We're asking for an opportunity to say what our priorities and needs are.
Yeah.
So people need not be fearful. There are some big issues this country has to grapple with.
Yeah.
Just compensation, a treaty, for example. But that's not what this referendum is about. This referendum is about recognising Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders as the first Australians and ensuring that government and parliament will listen to what we have to say. Yeah. For everybody else, that makes no difference. Yeah. Sorry, Chris.
No, that's fine.
That's great. There's a couple of just comments as well here. It said, I just wanted to say thank you for that explanation. It was really comprehensive. Thank you for your lifelong commitment to the work you're doing to support your people and all Australians. That's nice. Really nice. This one, not as positive, but thank you for your input, but I'm going to vote no, as I still don't know what changes the government are going to make when or if the yes vote gets through.
Yep. So I think, and it's similar to Marcia's point before, or your question before. If we wake up on Sunday and it is a yes vote, the count is yes. The government has to do consultation with all Australians, not just Aboriginal people, but all Australians. But in particular, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, they need to work out what regions are, what the regions will be, how it would gather. It will take time. Yeah. It will take time. Like when the government announces any major change to policy, they consult people, whether it's planning, laws, health laws, anything like that. Then the parliament has to create legislation on how it operates. So that's a whole nother process. And then once that's all done, which may take a couple of years, there's the implementation. The implementation can't happen overnight. No. There has to be an implementation phase. That might take 5 years. Yeah. There are communities, like we saw on the screen, there's communities that are ready. But it's not going to be, they will have to adjust themselves to suit whatever the legislation says. Yeah. And I think that's what the Australian people, that's what I think is missing in some of the conversation. A voice is not going to happen overnight. It's going to take some time.
I think the other thing that's missing is perhaps understanding the purpose of our Constitution. Yeah. Our Constitution empowers Parliament. Yeah. It empowers Parliament to make laws. Yeah. It empowers Parliament to make laws in relation to taxation, in relation to death, in relation to telecommunications, in relation to defence. And I think someone said there was something like 38, 48 specific powers or specific laws Parliament is empowered to make. Yeah. This will be another one. But we don't see the detail around tax law in our Constitution. we don't see the detail around marriage laws in our constitution, which is another parliamentary responsibility. So the expectation that the Australian public will see the detail out of something as complex as establishing an Aboriginal representative body is both unrealistic and disingenuous. Sorry. But if you have any understanding of the diversity and complexity that exists in Aboriginal communities across this country, then you would be asking government to press pause because we need to work out the detail. If the detail comes forward, it is just another imposed set of rules around how Aboriginal people will work with government. It's really important that we have a say in what that looks like. Otherwise, it just becomes another process of colonisation. So no, please don't put the detail in this referendum, because we need time to think and think deeply about that. And we need to make sure we get it as right as possible. So, you know, I don't want the detail. And that is not the purpose of the Constitution, which is what the referendum is. It's a change to our Constitution. It's not building new laws. That's quite a process that comes later.
Thank you. It's really insightful.
Good point.
Yes. I think we only
Sorry,
have
good point from the question.
I think we have about 5 more minutes. This is not a question here, but something that I've been hearing in community that in our communities, that treaties should be coming before a voice. I mean, I'm aware that the state governments are working on treaties, in particular Victoria and New South Wales
and Queensland.
And Queensland as well. I mean, do you think, can you see the voice impeding treaty making in any way, really?
No, so I think the voice is ultimately an advisory body to Parliament and government to ensure services are better delivered to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So it's about service delivery and better service delivery. In my opinion, a treaty is with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people within their cultural groups. It goes about the occupation of their traditional lands. And it's with the states. So it's not with, I don't believe, and people can argue differently and change my mind if they want, but I don't believe it's with the federal government, because the occupying state here has been New South Wales. And in New South Wales, the current government has announced that they will enter into a treaty. And I think next month they start that consultation process as well. The current Minister for Aboriginal Affairs is Aboriginal Affairs and Treaty. So it's starting to be entrenched in the way they do it. They do business. But like Marcia said, South Australia, like you said, Victoria and Queensland are far in front of New South Wales in their treaty processes. In Victoria, they've done all their consultations on how they make treaty processes, and they've determined how their regions and how they would gather themselves to make those decisions. In Queensland, there's been 3 treaty commissioners that have gone around to do the consultations. I'm not too sure how far South Australia is, but treaties are happening, and they're just happening with the states.
I have a slightly different view, but although I don't have a firm view. I think treaty is something that needs to be led by and for Aboriginal people. I worry that we don't have a leadership structure that can take us there. I do see that one day there may be a national treaty, but I think, you know, as Chris points out, and as I've said a couple of times, that needs to be led by our people. And it's not something, sorry, I'm an old chick. I don't think it's something that's going to be achieved in my lifetime. And I think it needs to be something that is, you know, the people now, like younger people like Chris, you know, our kids and our grandkids, they're the ones that need to lead that. What I would like my legacy to be is a leadership structure, so that we can have those conversations, firstly, within our own communities, and then secondly, with, you know, the relevant parties, whether it's state government, local government or federal government.
Absolutely.
The treaty is certainly something this country has to deal with, and we're dealing with it in lots of ways.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about before we finish up?
My view is the last referendum that Australia had, I was 17. So this is my first referendum that I'll get to vote in. I believe if on Sunday we wake up and it's a no, it would be very difficult for Aboriginal communities to engage in reconciliation because we've already been delivered the answer that Australia doesn't want to reconcile, doesn't want reconciliation with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I don't believe we'll have another referendum in my lifetime on this matter. And it just goes to show that what's happened over the last 50 years in regards to the federal government's policy and program making for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people is going to happen for another 50 years. And if that's the case, non-Aboriginal people out there who highlight that Aboriginal people get everything from government, they can no longer use that argument because they have agreed that it can continue on. And as we've heard, not all of that money goes to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities.
I was 4 years old in the 67 referendum. So when I was born, I wasn't a citizen. I wasn't considered by anybody. I think I was actually part of the flora and fauna legislation in New South Wales. And, you know, my elevation to citizenship through the, you know, being included in the census, I think my parents would reflect that it has provided a world of opportunity for me. And I like to think that I've benefited from that opportunity. Certainly I've enjoyed it. And, you know, we talked about legacy of what I leave my kids, but I was reminded about Noel Pearson's conversation the other day, and he and Rachel Perkins talked about tied legs. And, you know, I've spent a lifetime in Aboriginal affairs, even though I'm a beneficiary of what my parents and their parents achieved through that 67 referendum. You know, I've got tied legs from decades of working with and for my people and seeing so little change. And, you know, I want to go to rest feeling that we're in a better place. I don't want to hear my daughter talking about her tied legs. And I hope to God it's not her granddaughters sitting in a couch one day talking about tied legs. Australia has a unique opportunity to show the world really about how mature we are. It's not going to be a panacea. It's the start of a really serious journey, one that I hope we'll take together.
It's something that all Australians need to take really seriously when they go up there to make their vote. It's not just about us. It will change this country as a whole. So, and I've only been working in this space for a blip compared to what you've been doing, and I'm tired too, which is a lot to say. You know, I'm not even 30 yet, so I understand where you're coming from. Thank you both.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. Thank you.